Thank you. My name is Saša Leković. I'm a founder of Investigative Journalism Center, a member organization of SEENPM, and lately a founder of Fajana Media Fest, international multimedia journalism festival based in little city, village, or whatever spot on Eastern Peninsula in Croatia, where I'm actually speaking from. First of all, you know that this panel should be the last one, and will be actually the last one today. And we have to try to answer, let's say, on some basic question when it comes to the hate speech, because we have heard till now what happens with the hate speech, what's the problem journalists are confronted with when it comes to the hate speech, etc., etc. But the last panel is entitled "Confronting Hate Speech," and I hope we will have some questions. And I'm inviting all of you, all panelists and moderators and organizers to join, because this is the last one session. I think that we have even much more time than the other ones. And first of all, I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker, Federico Faloppa. He's from University of Reading in the United Kingdom, but as I know, he's also he has been, and he still is a lecturer at some other universities in the United Kingdom, Italy, and Spain, if I'm correct. Federico, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very generous presentation and for inviting me to join the panel today. Actually, I'm professor of linguistics at the University of Reading in the UK, and I'm also the coordinator of an Italian national network to combat hate speech and hate phenomena, which includes around 40 different organizations in Italy. Maybe I'm going to say something more about this later. And I'm currently one of the members of the Committee of Experts on Combating Hate Speech of the Council of Europe. I'm not a journalist, but I've been working for a long time with Italian journalists through the association Carta di Roma, for which I have trained hundreds of journalists on hate speech and discrimination issues in the last 10 years. And also, I'm an activist and a public figure in Italy. That's why, I've been the target of hate speech myself. But today I would like to tell you something about what to do, and especially from my point of view within the Committee of Experts of the Council of Europe. I'm also here today because this event has been organized in collaboration with a project which is entitled Combating Hate Speech in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is an interdisciplinary project supported by the UK Global Challenges Research Fund and coordinated by myself at the University of Reading and by Hamra Kacic in Sarajevo. And this project was designed to consolidate a network of subjects aiming at raising awareness on hate speech, and also provide several audiences, journalists like today, NGOs, operators, civil society organizations, policymakers, and scholars with a space for discussing issues related to hate speech, and also for implementing tools to combat hate speech, and also to disseminate counter narratives, which is one of the issues that we're going to talk about in the next hour. So just to briefly sum up this project, because it's crucial also and is related to what we do today, this project, Combating Hate Speech in Bosnia and Herzegovina, actually includes 4 major outcomes: a series of workshops with young people in Srebrenica, organized by an association which is called Adopt Srebrenica, an association and a documentation center in Srebrenica, which also seminars that took place in May and June. Then a series of webinars for journalists and media professionals organized by the Media Center in Sarajevo, and together with other organizations like today's conference. A conference open to the general public and involving scholars, policymakers, civil society representatives, organized by Sarajevo Open Center, which is going to happen in mid-July. And then a website designed and populated by students at the University of Sarajevo, which will be launched by the end of July. The idea behind this project is to continue working actually with the civil society organizations, but also to consolidate networks that already exist in Sarajevo and Bosnia and Herzegovina, And we would like to keep the network running and active, even after the 31st of July, when, officially the project is going to end. And so let's see what we can do also, by pulling together all the people that we had today and also the different organizations, because it would be very great and important actually to keep these channels open in order to provide us with a better understanding on the phenomenon and also ways of combating and contrasting these phenomena. But let me say something about the Council of Europe work, that what is being done at the Council of Europe level, especially by this committee of experts that was actually, that started working last year in 2020, and is trying to draft the new recommendations on hate speech for the 47 member states of the Council. And these recommendations, the draft of these recommendations is available online, so you can check that on the Council of Europe website. And we are happy to share that with the public opinion, with anybody in Europe, to see if we've done a good job so far and to see if we can still implement those recommendations by August. These new recommendations are quite ambitious, and I go straight to the main point: how to combat hate speech and how to provide us with tools and platforms to combat hate speech. Actually, these recommendations are trying to address hate speech from a comprehensive point of view. So in the recommendations, after a preamble which present hate speech as a deep-rooted, complex and multidimensional phenomenon, as we learned today also from the previous speakers, and tries to frame the hate speech within a human rights frame, a good amount of space is dedicated to the definition of hate speech. This is the first actually question, big point. We don't have a shared definition of hate speech across Europe, and that's a problem also when we want to combat hate speech, because sometimes, we mean hate speech, we mean something that is related to criminal law. Sometimes we mean something bigger, wider than criminal law, and actually we don't have a mutual understanding sometimes, even on the definition. That's a big problem. This is a big problem across the continent, not just in individual, in single countries. And so the point of view of the recommendations, are to include actually criminal liability, of course, in hate speech, when we talk about hate speech, but also civil liability, but also the hate speech that includes prejudice, stereotypes, and that may raise concerns in terms of tolerance, inclusion, exclusion, and respect for rights of other people. And so it's quite a complex matter, actually, and we need to go beyond the criminal kind of law definition that we've been using for the last 15 years or even longer than that. And also in the document, in the recommendations, we have several parts in order to provide the states with a comprehensive approach to it. But one of the main section is devoted to, apart from the definition, to the key actors that should be involved in order to combat hate speech. And we have, of course, internet intermediaries, so platforms, companies, transnational companies, and that's a huge issue. How do we work with them or for them, or actually to ask them to be responsible for what they do, and also when they transmit, disseminate hate speech across platforms? That's a very important, a very big question across Europe right now, and not just in Europe. Then of course, we need to tackle public officials and people working, civil servants and people working for public administrations, elected bodies and political parties, civil society organizations, and of course, the media sector. And so let me just say something more about the media sector, because it's a key sector that we are talking about today. And so in the recommendations, we included a few ideas, some ideas in order to make these recommendations more effective, and also to use them in order to combat hate speech, from the media sector perspective. And so we are saying in the recommendations, in the draft of the recommendations, media professionals should make a substantial and effective contribution towards the development of tolerance and mutual understanding, which is something that we haven't talked about today, not that much. Of course, we talked about hate speech against journalists and the media, but actually many countries in Europe, media, particularly mainstream media, are, a platform for disseminating hate speech. And sometimes we don't have enough awareness of this responsibility in the media sector, by the media sector. Or sometimes, you know, hate speech is just created and disseminated actually to get, you know, more likes on social media platforms or to sell even more copies. So hate sells in the media sector. We have to say it. And in many countries, I'm afraid, we see it in action. And so more, you know, contribute towards development of tolerance and mutual understanding between the different groups and minority groups in different societies, different contexts, national contexts, and also to address this matter comprehensively, as I said. And we need to ask media professionals to develop, update, and apply an appropriate professional standards and codes of conduct. And that's another key question. Do we have codes of conduct everywhere in Europe, within the Council of Europe? In some countries, we have very, you know, strict codes of conduct, but in other countries, you know, we don't have clear code of conduct. So what can we do? Can we share these codes, you know, across countries? Can we have a sort of a European regulation when we talk about the media sector? Can we invite people and people working in the media sectors from different countries to share best practice from one country to the next? Maybe we can, in order to have a better and higher standards when we talk about these issues. For instance, in Italy, where the so-called Carta di Roma that has been working for the last 15 years in order to implement a code of conduct when journalists talk about minority, migration, and sensitive topics like these ones. But also we have a lot of actions by the European Journalists Association, for instance, through the project Silence Hate that was developed a few years ago. And also, for instance, Media Against Hate in the UK has developed useful tools to, you know, to provide media professionals with shareable codes of conduct. Then, of course, we need to enable supervisory mechanism, including also authorities, independent authorities, a media self-regulatory body, that should play a positive role in addressing hate speech. So not just the media themselves, not just the national authorities, but maybe creating independent authorities in our countries to try to regulate and moderate also the content, you know, the media professionals, you know, face most of the time. We heard that today. And also in order to set up national independent agencies or bodies, if it's possible. And that's a recommendation. That's something that is included in the recommendation also by the Council of Europe, and also in the Digital Services Act by the European Commission that was, you know, communicated, was actually spread in December, last December. And then media organizations should maybe, without encroaching on their independence, be encouraged to report in a context-specific manner and to ensure that hate speech incidents, and we heard that today, and that's very key in my opinion, are brought to the attention of the public in a way which does not amplify the message, but can be, you know, can actually be a good way to combat, to contrast hate speech. So hate speech must be told in the media sector by the media professionals in a very sort of factual way. Silence, as we heard, you know, is something that we need to avoid, we should avoid. But also, we shouldn't amplify hate speech messages when these messages are reported by the media. And so in these efforts, you know, by the media sector to provide accurate and reliable information, the media sector, the media professional should avoid, of course, derogatory, stereotypical messages and depiction of individuals and groups and communities, particularly when we talk about minorities in European countries. And so probably by also involving minorities in their narratives. We heard that, including voices by minorities or the targets of hate speech, rather than just speaking for them, you know, on their behalf, including these voices in the media narratives and reporting. And so, of course, the need of training, we heard that, but also a better working condition for journalists. We need to say that. In some countries, contracts are not good enough to allow journalists to have the time and the preparation and the knowledge to actually to face these complex issues. So better contracts in the sector across Europe should be provided. And also further opportunities for diversity and inclusion in the media sector, more diversity in the media newsrooms, not just, you know, a majority groups, but also minority groups should be represented in the media sector in also to combat hate speech against everybody, you know, within the human rights kind of frame. A more ethical approach to the topic, further attention to the people directly and indirectly targeted by hate speech, not just the individuals, but also their communities. So the voices of the community should be actually acknowledged by media professionals in order to actually to combat that. And then I'm trying to conclude. I'm sorry, I don't want to be longer than that, but public service media in particular should not use and disseminate hate speech. So public services, not just the private sector, media, private companies, but also in particularly the public sector, public media should be alerted and also should avoid actually disseminating hate speech. And this should be regulated very strictly at governmental and state level, probably. And just to conclude, and for the sake of of opening up the discussion, these recommendations are placing the emphasis not just on the legal response to hate speech, which is a part of it, but it's not all of it, but also on awareness raising, training, education, and initiatives to support the victims and also to prevent hate speech at different levels. As we heard today, journalists are the targets of hate speech themselves. And actually the UNESCO report was, recalled earlier on by Jovana. And that's very important to know that, journalists, especially during the pandemic, became the target of hate speech because they tried to work on sensitive topics. And for doing this, they became targets of haters and hate speech transnationally, not just, on a national level. And so, of course, we need to be alerted on that. We need to provide journalists with the right protection and also the sort of, not just from a legal point of view, but the amount of solidarity they need. And that was very important what I heard today, that, newsrooms and colleagues express their solidarity towards the targets of hate speech. In many countries, in some countries, they don't do it, especially if the journalists are women. And so the male colleagues sometimes don't express that kind of solidarity because they think, oh, this is just a matter is, matters to you. It's not something that matters the category as a whole. And this is a gender gap and a gender problem that should be tackled in many countries as well, and including Italy. I'm talking also about my own country. And so the importance of including the recommendations, in the recommendations, actually, we don't have a specific paragraph, but I'm asking, the committee to think of a specific paragraph talking about protecting media professionals, not just their, responsibilities, but also their rights as professionals, which they should be taken into account also by the recommendations. And also, we should, as we heard, create more opportunities and chances for training, but not just for media professionals, but for police force, lawyers, judges, and the civil servants working in the country. Because, and I conclude there, we need to actually have that comprehensive approach to this issue. It's not that we can split it category by category. Journalists, politicians on another side, either we tackle these in a multi-layered way, and also we tackle these in a comprehensive way, or we don't. I don't think that we're going to find the answers that we need to find. And I'm very, very happy, therefore, to be here today with you. To further discuss these issues, but also to create a network, a wider network, which is transnational, which goes across professions and jobs and professional environments, to create that kind of awareness that we need at the public opinion level, but also to keep going, with these interdisciplinary and transnational activities and bodies that we are trying to create, because we need to tackle these, as a complex phenomenon. Either we better understand the phenomenon, we better understand its causes and its effects, and we better understand how to respond to that in a multi-layered way, or I'm afraid, we are not going to win this very important battle for human rights and for our societies. Thank you very much for letting me speak in a couple of minutes more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Federico, for putting many interesting issues as triggers for the discussion, and we'll back to you again, absolutely. But you don't hesitate to interrupt us with some advice, questions, or whatever, some idea during the panel. The next is Vesna Alaburić. She runs law office in Zagreb, and she graduated political sciences and graduate lawyer. What is very interesting mixture when you are media law expert. She has also experience defending journalists in many criminal proceedings, especially when it comes to defamation. Represented clients in various cases in relation to human rights, freedom of expression, and he actually has been part on the discussions and conferences when it comes to the drafting media laws and public debates about other human rights. Vesna, I'd like to ask you the first question. Federico told us something about the definition of hate speech, and he told us actually that it is no clear one definition everywhere. But hate speech is clearly defined by law in Croatia, for example. There is a lot of hateful speech that is undesirable and dangerous, but isn't hate speech in terms of law also? People, even some journalists, sometimes don't clearly understand where is the borderline. What is your experience?
Firstly, I would like to say hello to everybody, and I'm really delighted to discuss this issue with you today. So Federico told us that there is no clear definition acceptable in all countries about the term of the hate speech. And I, of course, completely agree. There is no definition in Croatia as well. We have only a definition of one aspect of hate speech, which is stated by criminal law, but there are many other forms of hate speech which is not covered with the hate law. But nevertheless, I am not a lawyer who actually likes definitions very much, because you cannot cover all aspects of one phenomena by a definition. That's why it's just enough to say what is the content of the hate speech and who are targeted group of the hate speech. So we all know what the content is. The content is all forms of expression that spread, incite, promote, or justify racial hatred. The targeted group are persons, a group or a person which belongs to a group, which is identified by some objective criteria, such as color, race, nationality, ethnic origin, religion, sex, or some other objective criteria. What is very important, and which is somehow not very clear in Croatia, is that there are some forms of hatred which are not based on some racist or discriminatory criteria, which cannot be treated as the hate speech in the meaning as I explained a minute ago. So you can have a form of expression of hatred. You can insult somebody motivated but not liking that person. But if that hatred is not based on some racist,
can anyone help with that?
Which means race, color, nationality, ethnic origin, or some other objective criteria, that cannot and should not be treated as hate speech. For example, if you insult the prime minister, if you have a very strong critics against prime minister, you even express your not dislike him and your hatred about the prime minister, but you are commending his behavior, his acts in official capacity as prime minister. This is not a hate speech. And this is something that not only journalists, but people in Croatia very often mix. And that is a kind of, on my opinion, of misusing the term of hate speech. Even our politicians sometimes use critics against them and try to treat them as the hate speech. And in my opinion, that somehow sharpen the the importance of the hate speech. And if you start to treat critics of politics or some other people from the public life as the hate speech, then we can forgot what the really hate speech is and what is the purpose of the laws of hate speech. So discussion is very actual, not only in Croatia, but as far as I know, in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in other European and other countries as well.
I think something, Saša, are you there?
Happened with Saša, yes.
Saša is, I think he's trying to reconnect.
Sorry, I was out, but I don't know if I was the only one or what happened, because first of all, I have lost Vesna and my screen was frozen, but I really don't know what happened after that.
Okay.
We'll investigate later, Saša.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, just go on.
Okay. I'll go with another question. First of all, I apologize because I said that when I said that the hate speech is clearly defined by law in Croatia, I was thinking about the criminal code, and you have explained actually what's going on there. But anyway, that doesn't mean that hateful speech should not be sentenced, although it's not hate speech by law. But we have, as you know, we have in Croatia, but also in the region, so much situations when hateful speech is on the table, or in media, on all sort of platforms, and what to do with that kind of stuff.
Well, I know that some freedom of expression lawyers from the countries with stable democracies, as they define their countries, are strongly against laws that should sanction hate speech, and that their position is that stable democracies are healthy societies that can deal with the hate speech with a completely different way, not by laws, prosecution, sanctions, prisons, etc., but that public discussion about hate speech statements, behaviors, or acts are quite enough in such countries to make everybody aware that such statements and acts are not desirable in tolerant, normal democracies. Since Croatia, and as far as I know, Bosnia and Herzegovina are not still countries of stable democracies, I would say that we should combine some things such as laws, prosecutions, and public discussions about hate speech, statements, acts, and behavior. So, according to the documents of the Council of Europe, we should be aware that not all forms of hate speech has to be sanctioned by criminal law. So, documents of the Council of Europe expressly recommend that not only criminal law, but also minor offense law, administrative law, or some other civil laws should be implemented if we want to fight against all forms of hate speech. And I completely agree. So criminal law has to be somehow reserved for the most dangerous forms of hate speech, which is incitement to violence and hatred toward the groups of some of the that racist discriminatory basis. But there are many other forms of the using fascist emblems or statements or Ustašas emblems and other forms of expression in some other forms that can be sanctioned as the minor offense, and that will be completely enough. Some forms of hate speech can be sanctioned as administrative offenses, for example, by some regulatory agencies with a forbidden or broadcasting television program for a day or two, or some other sanction. And on my opinion, the most very important are civil laws. You can, by civil laws, somehow sanction various forms of torts. And that civil laws enables persons whose dignity is somehow hurted by discriminatory or hate speech acts, and they can initiate court proceedings and protect their own human dignity or the human dignity of the group that they belong to. These civil laws also enable NGOs to initiate discriminatory proceedings, and the judgments in these proceedings are very, very important because they state what behavior or what statements are illegal and undesirable in a country such as Croatia. We have some examples of the very extreme hate speech and the situation that the person who expressed the statement was not was prosecuted in criminal proceedings, but was acquitted. And in the same time, for the same statement, that person was sanctioned in the civil court proceedings, and it is, on my opinion, very good position. That person really expressed very hateful expression, but he didn't incite to violence and hatred other people. He actually expressed his own opinion about other person, which really had all elements of hate speech. So that person was acquitted in the criminal proceeding, but was sanctioned in the civil proceeding. And that sanction was just enough that all Croatia knows that such statements are hate speech and are not desirable in any countries, including Croatia.
Okay, thank you. But in public discourse, as you already said, in a way, including the speech of politicians, what is very important, there are many insults, unfounded generalizations, direct verbal attacks, also to the journalist, on the journalist. It is as if the standards of public communication are set upside down. What we have as a result? Does such behavior push the boundaries of freedom of expression in the media, but also on social media?
Well, I would say that a public debate which is full of hate of any kind, and the behavior of our politicians who really insult and defame each other, not taking care about the way of expression, about the possible influence to public, etc. The discussions in our parliament are sometimes really horrified. And such public debate and discussion between our highest politicians somehow is a river that covers the whole society. So suddenly it's quite normal that you insult other people in everyday communication. It's quite normal that you use the same terminology in the media. And if you today use such insulting terminology, the second day you have to use some more strong words. And it is a never-ending story. And if you have such environment, then even discussion about the racist speech, discriminatory speech, is not such important because everything is very discriminatory on some basis, on insulting on some basis, and the hatred is all around us. So I would say that our politicians are not completely aware of the consequences of their behavior, and that fighting against hate speech should be in the same time fighting for the tolerant public discussion at least of the politicians who should be example how to communicate and how to solve some public disputes.
It raises, in a way, one other question. How intolerant, hateful public discourse on almost all topics affects the ability to recognize hate speech in true sense, defined by law or not, whatever. I'm talking about racist, discriminatory language, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, it is very discouraging. I can say something with which I am not very happy in my country. So I'm talking a lot about hate speech issues with the students of journalism and other young people at various workshops. And we are working on some case studies. And I would say that they are very, very sensible for the issues of Jews and their position in the society. They are aware of the Holocaust, discussing about the Holocaust in a negative context is a kind of a hate speech, and there is no discussion about that. They are aware of the rights of the LGBTQ population, etc., etc. But something about Serbs in Croatia is completely different. So if you have every day in some media, in the parliament or some other public events, statements about Serbs as the state enemies, as the persons who are you cannot rely on completely on some public functions, etc., etc., then the issue would be, if you have a case about Serb, for example, can a Serb in Croatia be a minister in Croatian government? And if you put such a question as for the case study, so far, almost none on workshops and of my students did not recognize a problem in that question. It is quite a normal question. And it is a good example how some public opinion about some group of people, it doesn't matter on which racist or discriminatory basis, can influence the perception about the problems connected with that group. So I think it's a big problem, and the only way to fight against that and to make people aware that racism in that question is that you question the possibility that a person be a member of a minister in Croatian government just on the basis of the nationality or ethnic origin is unacceptable in a democratic society. And you can fight against that only, as Federico said, and probably all of us will say, with public debate, with education, with workshops like this one, and just talking about the problems.
And the last one question by now, before we move to the other panelist, what do you mean? Are journalists exposed to hate attacks because they are journalists, because of what they write and say, because of their nationality, political affiliation, or based on some other reasons in Croatia and in other countries? Because you know very well the situation in the region and in some other countries in Europe, all over the world.
Well, as far as I know and as far as I am informed, journalists usually have problems because the content of their articles and their work, and especially they are trying to investigate some criminal activities of persons or groups. I wouldn't say that journalists in Croatia had problems with the text based on their nationality or ethnic origin. maybe by political affiliations, yes, especially in the 90s, because people and journalists who were, let's say, from the liberal left political wing were very often treated as the state's enemies. And if you treat anybody as the state's enemy, then all kinds of protection of your country against state's enemies are something that are desirable, and that is a big problem. So, but I would say that such political problems and attacks on journalism, political criteria, are mostly passed in Croatia.
Thank you very much, Vesna. For now, we have to move to the last one panelist, Helena Mandić. Helena Mandić is a Sarajevo Law School graduate. He worked in the Communications Regulatory Agency of Bosnia and Herzegovina since its inception in 1998, where she has performed various senior positions. She also participated in the work of expert groups drafting B&H press code, as well as laws on defamation, freedom on information and communications, and she has done some very significant roles in international organizations events and projects. Helena, thank you for being so good so patient and good and you were waiting so long for your turn. But first of all, because you are working in a regulation agency, regulators do not deal directly with the protection of journalists, what is actually one of the things we are talking about here today. But so what they could do in terms of protection of journalists, actually.
Well, thank you, and I'm really happy to be here. And this wait was actually fruitful because I always enjoy listening to experts talking on, especially on this subject, because this hate speech in general has been my area of interest for many years now. As you said, the regulatory bodies do not have mandate to protect journalists as such. But what I think is important in terms of today's discussion is that they perform their duties to the best of their abilities, including handling of cases of hate speech. In our code of practice for electronic media, we have a definition of hate speech, what we deem to be hate speech, and it's any content that humiliates, frightens, or incites to hatred, violence, or discrimination against a person or a group of individuals. So in terms of today's discussion, obviously, if we were faced with a case where there is an incitement to violence against a journalist, we would react. However, these cases are extremely rare, if almost not existent, in electronic media, because electronic media have been regulated for almost 20 years by independent regulators. So electronic media, the audiovisual media services providers, they have their code of conduct, so they know not to do such things. The problem is that most of the attacks against journalists have moved to sphere of online media, to sphere of social networks, and that's extremely difficult first to track, and then also there is this point that many of the regulatory authorities do not have mandate to regulate online sphere, and these things are being changed in terms of changes of the mandate of the regulatory authorities. The changes are very slow, and it will take a lot of time before the regulatory authorities are fully capable of tracking down such damaging and dangerous speech. I would like to just mention briefly that what was discussed. I mean, just to reflect on what has been discussed. There is this problem of lack of action by other state institutions, whomever they are in particular cases. We have been in our practice, we have been faced with cases, especially involving politicians who were giving very insightful statements and dangerous statements, where the media providers were not, that they were doing their job by the book, and there was no reaction to the behavior of the politicians. And as we know, when we are talking about how to define hate speech, there is this also element of the position of the speaker and his or her influence to wider population. So that's something that is worrying, has been worrying for years now. And as we agreed before, we're not living in a fully functioning democracy where established democratic mechanisms will take care of such events. What regulators can do in addition to their primary job, they can and they should react to every attack on media professionals. And I hate to say it, we haven't done that before, saying that it's not in our mandate. And but I think that we should have known better, that we should have reacted more aggressively, if I may say, to condemn any attack on journalists, because I think that would also contribute to creation of this safe environment for journalists. Another problem another thing that we could do is to promote and encourage all media literacy efforts, and to help people and audience to make better distinction between what hate speech is and what hate speech isn't. So I could speak for very long time, so I will stop here and we can continue with other questions.
That's okay. Thank you. I mean, but do you think that punishing the media, because it's very interesting, because many people, even sometimes the journalists, are not able to make sort of borderline between this distinction between media and journalists, because it's not the same all the time. Sometimes it's very mixed up and very confusing. But does punishing the media, which is part of your mandate of regulatory bodies, part of job, does punishing the media strengthen freedom of expression and the working conditions of journalists? That could be very how to say, not clear sometimes.
Yeah. It does sound illogical. It does sound counterintuitive that by punishing media, you actually provide for freedom of expression. But this comes from, I mean, obviously we live in the European area, and the European Convention on Basic Human Rights and Freedoms. It's as opposed to, for example, American case, we do have limits to freedom of expression. So once where a person misuses their freedom of speech in this particular case by so that it actually affects freedoms of other people or individuals. So the reaction of the state mechanisms are necessary. And I do believe that, and I do understand that not even journalists in some cases understand that it is necessary to react to such offenses and to issue sanctions, because it actually provides for again a safe environment where because I think that by letting such cases go, you would bring on more hate speech, as we talk about it. You would bring on more fear upon journalists and self-censorship as a final stage. So I do think that we should react.
Regulators should be independent, and they are, I mean, formally, or they are pretending to be, but in the region, I'm not going wider for the purpose of this discussion. They are under political control. That's absolutely. I mean, I can say that as a journalist with more than 40 years in journalism, and I used to be a president of the Croatian Journalists Association, and I know that what's going on. But I'd like to hear from you. Actually, the regulators are in the region under political control, or at least under political pressure all the time. In such situation, can they do their job well? Actually, from your perspective, you insider, please tell us.
It's extremely difficult, because I can only mention one example from our case, where that was ages ago, where we had a candidate for the director general of our agency who was not accepted by the ruling politicians and ruling coalition, and so they just decided not to appoint him, and he went on in what we call technical mandate. So after his regular mandate expired and the appointment process was not finalized in accordance with the law, he went on in this technical mandate for another 7 or 8 years. I can't even remember. So in the beginning, we continued to work as if everything was completely normal. But as the time went by, it did affect us, and it did affect the decisions that our director general made at the time. So that is really the problem. As you mentioned, the regulators, if not completely under political control, then they are under extreme political pressure, and that makes their job very, very difficult.
Again, based on your experience, how transparent is the work of regulatory bodies in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in other countries in the region, from your knowledge? Because transparent work should be one of the key key ideas when it comes to any kind of public regulation, regulation of the public TV or radio stations or any kind of media.
Well, our work has been quite transparent over the years, and I know that the work of some fellow regulatory authorities in the region has also been transparent. But I have just recently learned of the case in Serbia, in their regulatory authority for electronic media, where they decided, I'm sorry, to publish with the minutes of the sessions of their media council, to also publish the recommendations made by the experts within the agency, within the regulatory bodies. Because I know from my personal experience that sometimes we in the agency, when we see the program and when we judge it against the applicable provisions and make recommendations to our Director General, he or she doesn't agree, and his decision goes out. I think that this is what they do in Serbia now is a good step forward in more transparency of the work of the regulators, because you will have the public now can make also their opinion, informed opinion, based on the findings of the monitoring service within the agency and the decision of their council. So I think it's one of the cases of the positive practice that will, I hope, root further in the future.
Okay, let's conclude this part with one question about one case happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We recently had the Senad Hadživezović case, let's so-called. Maybe it's not over yet. The popular TV journalist was target of threats and attempt physical attack. Even what were the reactions of the journalistic community, media, and public, general public?
This case, in my opinion, is very significant, and I'm not by any means trying to belittle any other case of threats or attacks against journalists. This case is important because Senad Hadživezović has been a media professional for more than 30 years now, and for years he's been almost adored by people in Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially in this one part of Bosnia and Herzegovina where he works and lives. And then he started to criticize the ruling parties. He started to expose certain behaviors, and people now there is a growing public discourse that he has sold himself, that he has betrayed all professional standards, and as Anita mentioned in the opening presentation, he is a traitor. She wasn't obviously talking about him, but he is a traitor of Bosniaks, of this ethnic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This public discourse has grown so exponentially over the years that now that he has been faced with a case of serious threats against his work and even life in some instances, I would say, there was a uniform condemnation of these threats and attacks, but there were so many cases where people, normal citizens, but also media professionals, said, we do condemn these attacks and threats, but he should have respected more the professional standards, etc. What I think is important is that this case actually shows how easily we can fall into a trap where we say, okay, he deserved it. Because I think that any failure to abide by professional standards and should be discussed every day. We can talk about it in various sessions, but not when a person is under attack. I think that bringing in this aspect, which is extremely important in the sphere of attacks, actually dilutes the support. And as I said, it gives people, this narrative that a person deserve any threat or attack. But that is really, I mean, I'm not surprised, because last year we had a case where a journalist crew went to facilities of a tycoon who's very close to one of the ruling political parties. They wanted to film it, and the owner or the director, I can't remember, he actually attacked a cameraman, and later he was exonerated by this leader of this political party, who said that he hadn't attacked a cameraman, he attacked a camera, and it stayed on. So this provides for this atmosphere in which anyone can attack journalists regardless of consequences.
Thank you very much, Helena, Vesna, and Federico. I really enjoyed to speak with you and to listen to what you have to say. Tiho, excuse us for being 8 minutes all the time, but I hope, because this still is the last session, I hope everything's fine with the time.
Thank you, Saša. You are forgiven. Thank you all for fascinating presentations. It was very, very useful, certainly for people from our network. I hope it was useful for others. I think we raised quite a few very, very important questions. Just thinking of the final session, we heard of some important international efforts to combat hate speech and its consequences also for journalists, our topic here today. But I think also what Vesna and Helena were saying, one issue perhaps that we will be facing increasingly in future is to sort of try to locate whose responsibility it is to deal with certain types of hate speech, certain consequences of hate speech, and what sort of responsibility, whether it is criminal responsibility or it should be dealt somehow in other ways by different societal actors. That will increasingly be through of who is responsible for what happens on social media. Could anyone regulate it, etc.? Of course, we've heard that not all hate speech could be addressed by criminal law. Of course not. It shouldn't be. And then, of course, an important issue there is something that Helena touched upon, is what it is that the regulators are responsible for. Of course, interpreted narrowly, they're responsible for what's on the electronic media screens or what is on radio stations. But of course, what if a TV show triggers an avalanche of hate speech on social media or somewhere else? Or what if a TV journalist is attacked or exposed to hate speech, not on that media outlet, but somewhere else? I suppose we will soon be addressing, not just in Western Balkans, but everywhere, increasingly the question of what is a media outlet. Mm-hmm. Anyway, enough from me. Thanks a lot. It was fascinating. We hope to soon be able to work more on this particular topic, to explore further the impact of hate speech on the work of journalists, on their safety, their independence, ability to operate independently in general. Perhaps we will be able to do more ambitious, even maybe in-person events, hopefully soon. Maybe our researchers will find it necessary to do another research on this specific topic. We'll see. Many thanks for your time today, for your efforts. Thank you. Thanks again, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.